This anime series begins by showing Daryl, a dark soldier in the Demon King's army, who has just been fired from the Demon King's army by one of the 4 demon generals, Bashbaza, because Daryl is considered not to have the ability to use magic like other demons. Not only dismissed Daryl from the Demon King's army, Bashbaza also expelled Daryl from the demon world, which was also approved by the other demon generals who only considered Daryl as a lowly demon. Bashbaza and the other demon generals actually disliked Daryl's presence in the Demon King's army, but they were forced to accept Daryl because the former demon general, Granvaza, made Daryl an assistant to the new 4 generals. Despite not being able to use magic, Daryl had extraordinary talent, intelligence and initiative, so he became one of the Demon King's most trusted captains in the demon world. However, after Granvaza decided to retire, Bashbaza seized the opportunity to fire Daryl and expel him from the demon world. On the other hand, Daryl had no choice but to accept Bashbaza's decision, especially since he could not deny the fact that he could not use magic like other demons. While walking away from the palace, Daryl was approached by a dark soldier named Reset who insulted Daryl because Daryl was a lowly demon. But unexpectedly, Daryl completely ignored the insinuation and just walked away, leaving Reset behind. Daryl, who is now homeless, then wanders aimlessly for several days, until he accidentally encounters a girl named Marika who is being chased by a scary monster who immediately attacks her. Upon seeing that, Daryl tried to help Marika, even though he realized that he did not have the magic power to subvert the monster. Even so, Daryl did not give up and tried to use his physical strength to fight the monster. Daryl, who hadn't eaten for days, didn't have enough energy, so he was easily knocked down by the monster. Daryl then grabbed Marika's dagger and tried to use it against the monster, even though he had never used a human weapon, as it was a disgrace to the demons. When the monster attacked again, Daryl immediately stabbed the monster in the heart with the dagger, and managed to defeat the monster. Upon seeing that, Marika then thanked Daryl for saving her life while praising Daryl by saying that Daryl had extraordinary strength like the legendary hero. Daryl did not expect that he, who was a demon, was considered like a human hero. Therefore, Daryl decided to leave there immediately because he didn't want to get into trouble if he got too close to Marika, who was a human. However, Marika then prevented Daryl from leaving because she intended to return the favor by inviting Daryl to her house. Daryl initially refused the invitation, but Marika said that she would serve Daryl with various delicious dishes, so Daryl finally agreed to go with Marika. Upon arriving home, Marika introduced Daryl to her parents who welcomed Daryl warmly. Daryl then told Marika and her parents that he had just been fired from his job, and was now a homeless man wandering aimlessly. Upon hearing that, Marika and her parents then offer Daryl to stay in their house as they have many empty rooms. After some consideration, Daryl agrees to stay in their house while hiding the fact that he is a demon. Later that night, Daryl, who was brooding in his room, was surprised by Marika, who spoke to him from behind the door. Marika said that she was very grateful to Daryl for saving her, while revealing that she had always been relied on by others, and for the first time in her life, someone came to save her. After saying that, Marika then said goodnight to Daryl and returned to her room. The following day, Marika's father, Enviel, suggested to Daryl to become an adventurer, because Enviel was the leader of the Adventurers Guild in the village. Before becoming an adventurer and getting quests from the Adventurers Guild, Enviel told Daryl that Daryl had to perform certain rituals to measure his abilities. Upon knowing that, Daryl immediately rejected Enviel's offer, and saying that he preferred to farm the fields rather than become an adventurer who usually undertook dangerous missions. However, the real reason Daryl refused Enviel's offer was because he didn't want his identity as a demon to be revealed through the ritual, especially since many demon spies have ended up miserably because their identities were revealed after performing the ritual. Daryl even pretended to have back pain to convince Enviel, but unexpectedly, Enviel and Marika had anticipated the rejection, so they worked together to enroll Daryl into the Adventurers Guild. Surprisingly, Daryl did not show any demon-like reactions when he performed the ritual, so Daryl finally realized that he was a human who had been living in the demon world. This fact also explains why Daryl cannot use magic, because he is not a demon, but a human who was raised as a dark soldier by Granvaza. Soon after that, Enviel explained to Daryl about aura, because the adventurers are required to know their aura type, and the power of the aura can later be used by them through the weapons they choose. Upon learning that, Daryl then chose a sword as his weapon, because he used to practice swords with Granvaza. When Daryl tried to flow his aura into his sword, Enviel told him that aura has 4 types, and these types will determine the suitable weapon for them to use. Enviel then explained about the slash-type aura while telling Daryl to cut down a tree using his sword. Daryl was initially pessimistic that he could cut the tree with his sword, but surprisingly, he could easily cut the tree without any effort. Next, Enviel told Daryl to shoot an apple from a distance to find out if Daryl had a sting-type aura, and surprisingly, Daryl could shoot his target so accurately that Enviel and Marika were amazed at his archery skills. Not only slash-type and sting-type aura, Daryl also had hit-type aura after he managed to smash a large boulder using a wooden hammer. Enviel even cried happy because he still had the opportunity to witness a young man who had extraordinary strength like Daryl. So he then told Daryl to take a wooden shield to test whether Daryl had an endure-type aura by trying to attack Daryl using an iron hammer. Daryl was initially pessimistic that he could withstand the attack, but surprisingly, Daryl was not only able to withstand the iron hammer attack using the wooden shield, but he also managed to make Enviel bounce because of his extraordinary strength. After confirming that Daryl had all types of aura, Enviel, who was very impressed with Daryl, then advised Daryl to adventure around the world, and register as an adventurer in guilds in big cities so that Daryl could use his power to the fullest. At the same time, Daryl realized that Marika would feel sad if he left the village, so Daryl then decided to stay with Marika and her parents because he wanted to repay their kindness for helping him when he was in the worst condition in his life and had no place to live. Upon hearing that, Marika suddenly became happy and hugged Daryl. Soon after that, Enviel introduced Daryl to all the villagers as an adventurer and new resident in the village. The villagers seemed to welcome Daryl to their village in a friendly manner, especially the women who admired Daryl's good looks and his polite demeanor. However, a young man named Gashida did not seem to like Daryl's presence in the village, even openly underestimating Daryl, who was still at rank E, while he was already at level D, which indicated that Gashida was Daryl's senior in the Adventurers Guild, so Gashida asked Daryl to respect him, even though Daryl was older than him. Enviel then assigned Daryl to look for medicinal plants in the forest as Daryl's first mission, while warning Daryl about the existence of scary monsters in the forest. When Enviel showed a picture of the monster because Gashida was going to take the mission to defeat the monster, surprisingly, the monster was the monster that Daryl had defeated when he first met Marika, so Enviel then decided that the mission had been completed by Daryl. Gashida, who was upset because Daryl had taken his mission, even though it was unintentional, then took the mission to defeat other monsters while insinuating Daryl that he was more suitable for carrying out missions to collect medicinal plants because Daryl was still ranked E. But unexpectedly, Enviel then raised Daryl's rank to rank D because Daryl had defeated the monster. On his first mission this time, Daryl will be accompanied by Marika, who will be a guide because the area is still too unfamiliar for Daryl, who is a newcomer. While climbing the cliff, Marika revealed that she actually wanted to become an adventurer to help the villagers because Gashida was reluctant to take the mission to find medicinal plants, and was more interested in defeating the monsters. Upon arriving in the forest, Marika explains to Daryl about several types of medicinal plants and their properties, so Daryl becomes impressed that Marika has a broad knowledge of medicinal plants. Not only that, Marika was also able to lift a large tree quite easily, and she could even see deer tracks that Daryl could not even see. Upon realizing that, Daryl also thinks that Marika actually has enough strength to defeat the monster, but Marika denies that, telling Daryl that she can't fight at all, so she is very grateful that Daryl saved her. Marika then asked Daryl to stop calling her Miss Marika because Marika wanted to get closer to Daryl. Because Daryl still occasionally calls her Miss, Marika finally punishes Daryl by hugging Daryl every time he calls her Miss Marika. Daryl, who felt awkward being hugged by Marika, then tried to distract her by saying that he saw a deer hiding behind the bushes. Surprisingly, a deer did appear in front of them, but the deer suddenly acted strangely because it realized the presence of a monster nearby. While the deer and the monster were fighting each other, Daryl and Marika seized the opportunity to take them down at once. After getting the medicinal plants they needed, Daryl and Marika then returned to the village while carrying the deer and the monster, which turned out to be Gashida's target monster. Upon seeing that, Gashida suddenly became upset because Daryl had again snatched the monster, even though Daryl did not know that Gashida was hunting the monster. The following days, Daryl lived his life peacefully and did his routine in the village without encountering the slightest difficulty. One day, Daryl accidentally crossed paths with Gashida, who was in a hurry to leave the Adventurers Guild office because he was going on a mission. Upon arriving home, Daryl was greeted by Marika, who told him that she had cooked various delicious dishes for Daryl. However, Daryl ignored Marika and went straight to Enviel to report to the guild leader that he had completed his mission. Enviel then expressed his concern about Gashida, who was sulking because Daryl had snatched his mission twice, so Gashida was desperate to take on a dangerous mission. Upon hearing that, Daryl apologized because he really didn't know that the monsters he had defeated were Gashida's hunting monsters. Marika also defended Daryl in front of her father by saying that Daryl had done the right thing by defeating the monsters, because if left alone, the monsters might attack the villagers. Enviel then informed Daryl about a serrated snake monster that had now entered their territory. Enviel added that the mission to defeat C-rank monsters would usually be given to adventurers with higher ranks than Daryl and Gashida, but Gashida was desperate to take on a dangerous mission to help the adventurers who were currently besieging the snake monster in the forest. Upon learning that, Daryl then told Enviel that he would go to help Gashida, and promised to bring Gashida home safely. Marika intends to accompany Daryl, but Daryl tells Marika to stay at home because this mission is very dangerous. Even though she could not accompany Daryl on this mission, Marika gave Daryl her own concoction so that Daryl could use her concoction if he or Gashida was injured on the mission. Arriving in the forest, Daryl realized that the weather suddenly became cloudy and he found traces of a giant monster that was destroying the trees around him. Soon after that, Gashida suddenly appeared while running because he was being chased by the giant snake monster. Upon seeing that, Daryl prepared to attack the monster, but the monster instead targeted Gashida, who tried to attack the monster with arrows. However, the attack did not work at all, and the monster quickly lunged at Gashida, who did not have enough time to escape. Fortunately, Daryl appeared in time to save Gashida even though his attack had not been able to bring down the snake monster, who then counterattacked. Daryl tried to block the attack with his Endure-type aura, but the monster's attack was much stronger, causing his sword to break. At this crucial moment, Daryl then thought of various ways to defeat the snake monster, until Daryl finally decided to use the Sting-type and Hit-type aura all at once. Daryl quickly threw his broken blade into the monster's mouth with the Sting-type aura, then strengthened his attack power with the Hit-type aura, until he finally managed to defeat the monster. Upon seeing that, Gashida looked so impressed that Daryl was able to use two types of aura at once and managed to subvert the C-rank snake monster. Daryl then treated Gashida's wounds with Marika's medicinal herbs. Marika had even prepared an antidote because she had predicted that the snake monster's poison might be deadly if not treated quickly. Gashida was even more impressed that Daryl not only possessed extraordinary aura power, but also had extensive knowledge of medicinal plants. Daryl pointed out that he gained knowledge about medicinal plants from Marika, and Marika also taught him about various healing methods that can be used in any situation. Daryl told Gashida that in this world there are no useless things, so Gashida then cried because he finally realized his mistake of having underestimated the mission to find medicinal plants, even though the mission was as important as the mission to defeat monsters. The next day, while Daryl and the others were having breakfast, Gashida suddenly came to Marika's house and began to respect Daryl by calling him his senior. Gashida told Marika and her father that from now on, he would be working with Daryl on a mission to find medicinal plants, while suggesting that the mission was as important as any other mission. On the other hand, Daryl didn't mind working with Gashida on the mission, but for some reason, Daryl suddenly became curious about the current situation in the demon world, especially the situation faced by the demon generals after they fired and expelled him from the demon world. The scene then switched and showed one of the demon generals, Zabiantis, who was badly injured in a battle against the hero and his party, which led to the demon general's defeat. An upset Zabiantis blamed everything on their new advisor, so Bashbaza fired him. Because they had changed advisors 5 times since Daryl's dismissal, one of the demon generals, Deroye, then suggested to Bashbaza to rehire Daryl, because Daryl always did his job perfectly and had expertise in developing war strategies. Not only that, Daryl also always pays attention to their health. Even Daryl also did not hesitate to help Deroye, who had experienced unpleasant events when she was having her period. However, Bashbaza firmly rejected the suggestion to rehire Daryl. Even he was very angry when Deroye mentioned Daryl, as if Bashbaza really hated Daryl. Although Bashbaza and the others had expelled him from the demon world, Daryl did not hold a grudge at all, and hoped that they would be fine. Especially now that Daryl has also lived a peaceful and happy life in the human world. One day, on the way home after carrying out a mission, Daryl seemed a little annoyed because Gashida continued to babble throughout the journey. Even so, Daryl chose to let him be, because it would be better if they were friends rather than making Gashida his enemy. Upon arriving home, Daryl was immediately greeted by Marika, who hugged him so excitedly that Daryl was injured. In the evening, Enveil told Marika to get a map because he wanted to show something to Daryl. However, because Marika did not come, Daryl then looked for Marika and found her sitting pensively while blaming herself for overreacting until Daryl was injured. Upon knowing that, Daryl said that Marika didn't need to blame herself because it was an accident, while emphasizing that he only suffered minor injuries, so Marika didn't need to worry about him. Marika, who heard Daryl's words, then regained her spirits, and immediately got the map requested by her father. Enveil then told Daryl that their village, Lux, used to be a prosperous village because there was a mithril mine located not far from the village. Mithril is a metal that has unique properties and can be used as a material for weapons with unrivaled performance. Demons usually use mithril to make magic equipment capable of storing magic energy, so demons and humans have often fought over mithril mines for hundreds of years. Lux used to be a stopover for mithril miners, so there were quite a few inns and eateries in the village to accommodate mithril miners who wanted to rest. However, the demons eventually gained control of the mithril mines, so the humans had a hard time obtaining mithril. They had tried to wrestle the mithril mines away from the demon army, but always failed, so they finally gave up. From then on, Lux became a dead village as most of its residents chose to leave the village. Enveil added that he was probably the last generation to know about the prosperity of Lux village because most of the current Lux villagers were immigrants. The following day, Daryl secretly visited the mithril mine that currently controlled by the demon army, but surprisingly, he did not find a single demon soldier in that place. Daryl had intended to negotiate with the demons to sell mithril to the villagers so that they could make a profit. When entering further into the mine, Daryl finally met a herd of midget demon miners called Knockers, who were also acquaintances of Daryl. Knockers seemed happy to meet Daryl because Daryl used to be their boss. Knockers then informed Daryl that Baza had them mine more mithril than before, but on the other hand, he also reduced the number of workers to reduce costs, so those who worked in the mine became increasingly tortured because they had to work harder than before. Upon learning that, Daryl felt sorry for the Knockers working in the mine, but he could not do anything to help them because he was no longer part of the demon army. Shortly afterward, a demon army led by a commander named Mark appeared, who then scolded the Knockers for thinking that they had sabotaged the mithril mine, even though in reality, the Knockers were unable to mine 4 times as much mithril as ordered by Baza, so they begged Mark to reduce the supply of mithril that they had to meet every month. But Mark refused to hear any complaints, and he instead used his magic power to scare the Knockers, until one of the Knockers was desperate to hit the commander's head with a shovel, which made Mark even angrier and ordered his troops to attack the Knockers. Daryl, who saw this from his hiding place, then tried to help the Knockers while covering his face to hide his identity from the demon army who might still recognize him. Mark thought that Daryl was the one who had incited the Knockers to defy Baza's orders, so Mark then ordered the demon army to kill Daryl and the Knockers. One of the Knockers then tried to help Daryl by attacking a demon soldier, but the soldier immediately kicked the Knocker, even though he had prepared to use his magic power, which made Daryl remember a rule in the demon army that they were prohibited from using magic power on workers, including midget demons like Knockers. Therefore, Daryl tried to convince the demon soldiers to remember their honor as demon knights to always protect the weak. Upon hearing that, the demon soldiers suddenly became hesitant to attack Daryl and Knockers, but Mark then bullied them, so the demon soldiers had no choice but to obey Mark's orders. Surprisingly, Daryl turned out to have memorized all the magic spells that usually used by the demon soldiers, and he was even able to calculate the time needed to cast the magic spell, so he was able to attack them effectively. Mark did not expect Daryl to be able to predict their attacks, so he then pulled out his ultimate magic technique, although in the end the technique was easily broken by Daryl. The terrified Mark then begged Daryl to spare his life while revealing that he was actually an ordinary servant who was appointed as commander by Baza. Mark also mentioned the honor of a knight to convince Daryl not to kill him, who was actually a civilian. However, Daryl then questioned Mark why he still ordered his troops to kill Knockers even though Mark knew about the honor. Therefore, Daryl still punished Mark by cutting his hair and telling Mark to resign from the Demon King's army. Even though Daryl had successfully expelled Mark and the demon army from the mine, the Knockers still felt a little worried because Baza might send another army to attack them. However, knockers thought that it was not a big problem because Daryl would always be there to protect them. Upon arriving home, Daryl then informed Enviel that he had successfully reclaimed the mithril mine from the demon army. Upon hearing that, Enviel was shocked because Daryl was able to take over the mithril mine by himself without any help from anyone. Instead of explaining in detail about the takeover process, Daryl begged Enviel to cooperate with the knockers. Enviel initially refused Daryl's request because the knockers sided with the demon nation, but because Daryl guaranteed that the knockers would obey whatever he ordered, Enviel finally agreed to work with the knockers. From then on, the villagers began to carry out mining activities, while knockers became their guide in the mines so that they could mine more mithril so they could get more profit. Over time, Lux became a village that was quite visited by migrants, and became a busy stopover due to the heavy activity in the mithril mine. As the head of the village, Enviel then thanked Daryl for his services in seizing the mithril mine from the demon army so that the villagers could regain their profitable livelihood. Meanwhile, Bashbaza, who was conducting magic experiments, was visited by Zabiantus, who was curious about the experiment. Bashbaza then explained to Zabiantus that he was creating a device to condense magic into magic weapons using mithril as the main material. Bashbaza revealed that he intended to create a magic bomb that had extraordinary explosive power, which with this invention, Bashbaza hoped to get recognition from the Demon King and become the greatest demon general in the demon world. Because of his very ambitious experiment, Bashbaza needed 4 times as much mithril, so he ordered the knockers to work harder in mining mithril. But unexpectedly, Zabiantus informed Bashbaza that the mithril mine had been reclaimed by humans, so the Demon King sent her to inform Bashbaza that the Demon King wanted Bashbaza to come to him immediately. Upon hearing that, Bashbaza then rushed to the Demon King, who demanded an explanation from Bashbaza regarding the mithril mine that had been reclaimed by the humans. Bashbaza tried to find a reason so that the Demon King would not punish him, but the Demon King found out about the experiments being carried out by Bashbaza, so he asked Bashbaza to stop the experiment, and punished Bashbaza by telling him to say an apology, which turned out to be very difficult for Bashbaza, who had always been arrogant. After Bashbaza apologized, the Demon King then advised Bashbaza to ask Daryl for help to solve the problem. The Demon King added that Bashbaza's father, Granvaza, became one of the great demon generals because he always got help from Daryl, who had talent and intelligence despite not being able to use magic like other demons. Upon hearing that, Bashbaza then left the Demon King's residence and feeling angry because the Demon King not only considered him stupid, but also mentioned Daryl's ability, as if the Demon King underestimated him and considered Daryl greater than him. Meanwhile, Daryl, who lived his life peacefully in the human world, was seen chatting with Marika, who at that time imagined that she was married and had children. Marika then told Daryl that Daryl would be a great father someday, and just when Marika was about to say something to Daryl, suddenly there was a commotion behind them, so they immediately headed there to check the situation. The commotion was apparently triggered by Gashida getting into a feud with a B-rank adventurer named Fitbitan from the city of Campbell. Daryl then introduced himself to Fitbitan and his party while showing his rank. Upon seeing that Daryl and Gashida were still ranked D, Fitbitan then looked down on them, saying that Daryl was just lucky when he defeated the demon army and reclaimed the mithril mine. Not wanting to make this situation more complicated, Daryl told Fitbitan that it was indeed a luck. Daryl, who knew that Fitbitan had previously underestimated Gashida, then mentioned about the snake monster that Fitbitan and his party had failed to defeat so that the snake monster entered their village area. Daryl added that the person who first managed to track down the snake monster was Gashida, which proved that Gashida was a great adventurer, so Fitbitan shouldn't look down on Gashida just because he was a rank D adventurer. Gashida, who heard Daryl's defense, was so moved, so he revealed to everyone that Daryl was the one who had defeated the snake monster by himself. Upon knowing that, the villagers hailed Daryl as their hero, while Fitbitan was both jealous of Daryl and upset that he had been humiliated by Daryl. Later that evening, Gashida told Daryl and Marika that he was involved in an argument with Fitbitan because Fitbitan had insulted Daryl. Upon hearing that, Marika became furious and told everyone that she would kill anyone who had insulted her husband. The husband Marika was referring to was actually Daryl, but she let it slip because she hoped to marry Daryl. An embarrassed Marika hurried to the kitchen, while Gashida joked that he would marry Daryl. The next day, Daryl was visited by a man named Besfred, who was an envoy from the Central Guild in the capital. Besfred tried to ask Daryl to help him negotiate with the knockers regarding the mithril business. Because the knockers did not seem to trust outsiders like Besfred, and were always wary when he tried to talk to them. Upon learning that, Daryl agreed to help Best Fred, and surprisingly, the knockers immediately agreed to the business offer proposed by Best Fred according to Daryl's request. Best Fred, who saw this, then became impressed because Daryl was able to make the knockers obey his words as if Daryl was their leader. When he was about to leave the mithril mine, Daryl accidentally met Fitbitan and his party, and immediately greeted them in a friendly manner. Fitbitan's party members returned the greeting in a friendly manner, but not with Fitbitan, who was arrogant because he was still annoyed at Daryl. At the same time, Daryl saw a demonic magic formation in the sky, so he immediately went to check it out to find out who came and summoned knockers. By using the aura that enveloped his whole body, Daryl was able to run fast and jump high, so he could easily find a group of demon warriors who were talking to knockers in a magic formation. Surprisingly, the demon soldiers turned out to be led by Reset, who looked happy because he finally met Daryl again after a long time. Reset then told Daryl that the current demon kingdom had become very messy since Daryl's departure. Because Daryl never returned to the demon world, Reset felt guilty because at their last meeting, Reset insinuated Daryl by calling Daryl a lowly demon. Reset then apologized to Daryl while insisting that he never intended to insult Daryl in the first place. However, Daryl did not mind at all as he revealed to Reset that he was actually a human, and asked Reset to keep that fact a secret from anyone. Reset then told Daryl that since Daryl left, Bashbaza's leadership had caused the chain of command to fall apart, causing the superiors and subordinates to become frustrated with their current situation. The Demon King even intervened to reprimand Bashbaza directly, but it didn't seem to change things much. Reset added that Bashbaza actually forbade the other demons from touching the mithril mine near Lux village, but Reset got special permission from the Demon King, so he then came to check the situation and talk to knockers in order to solve the problem related to the diminishing supply of mithril. Reset tried to convince Daryl to return to the demon world and fix things, because many demons were expecting Daryl to return, especially Deroye, who actually cared about Daryl. However, Daryl refused to return to the demon world because he had found a new and better life in Lux village with the people who had saved him when he was down in his life and had nowhere to go. Even so, Reset still tried to bring Daryl to the demon world, not even hesitating to use his magic power to attack Daryl. But surprisingly, Daryl could easily break the attack and told Reset that he had an idea to solve the problem regarding the supply of mithril. Later that night, Daryl took Reset to meet Best Fred while revealing to Best Fred that Reset was the emissary of the Demon King. Daryl intends to make a business deal that benefits demons and humans so that the two sides no longer engage in war just to fight over the mithril mine. Daryl then told Best Fred that the demon army would not attack the humans as long as their mithril supply remained fulfilled. Daryl also added that the demons would buy mithril from them at a price that was 4 times more expensive than the market price, and Reset confirmed it because he had to immediately solve the problem related to the supply of mithril, so he did not mind solving the problem with money. But unexpectedly, Fitbitan, who was also there to listen to the negotiations, then protested because he objected if humans had to make peace with the demon nation that had been their mortal enemy. Fitbitan did not even hesitate to try to attack Reset, but Daryl immediately swiftly parried the attack while telling Fitbitan that they should try to do various ways to avoid bloodshed in the future. Even so, Fitbitan still refused to cooperate with the demon nation, and asked Best Fred to leave because there was no point in continuing the negotiations. But unexpectedly, Best Fred gave Fitbitan a stern reprimand for interfering in their business, even though Fitbitan was just a bodyguard. Best Fred then told Daryl that he agreed to make a deal with the demon nation regarding the mithril business. Daryl and Reset were happy that they had finally reached an agreement that benefited both parties, while Fitbitan seemed to be getting more and more annoyed at Daryl because Daryl had humiliated him again. The next day, Reset thanked Daryl for helping him solve the mithril supply problem. However, Daryl told Reset that the agreement could be reached because Reset was willing to establish a cooperative relationship with humans, which other demons might not do. Daryl also hopes that someday, demons and humans can coexist peacefully, so that there will be no more wars that will only harm both parties. The following days, Best Fred commissioned Daryl to rebuild the mithril foundry in the village. Upon arriving at the forge, Daryl met Fitbitan, who had apparently claimed the forge by bringing in blacksmiths from the city of Campbell. Daryl then told Fitbitan that Best Fred had assigned him to reopen the forge, but Fitbitan instead insulted Daryl because of his rank below him, and told Daryl to leave the place. When Daryl arrived home, Enveil informed him that Fitbitan and the Campbell Guild wanted to own the rights to their mithril mine earnings, even though they were only assigned as patrol officers at the mine. Upon learning that, Daryl felt guilty towards the villagers because he let Fitbitan claim the mithril foundry. Shortly afterwards, Marika appeared and told Daryl about an old man who had been indecent to her. Upon hearing that, Daryl went to the old man, but the old man argued that he tripped and accidentally touched Marika's breast. After explaining the misunderstanding, the old man then introduced himself as Smith and blatantly told Daryl that he looked weak, even his sword looked ordinary. Daryl actually didn't care about people's judgment about him, but Marika was not happy with the judgment because she thought Daryl was a great adventurer. When Marika told Smith that Daryl had defeated a snake monster single-handedly, Smith then held Daryl's palm to measure his abilities, and Smith was very surprised to find that Daryl had all 4 types of aura that could all be used to the fullest, which was a rare talent. Smith then revealed his identity as a blacksmith assigned by the Central Guild to forge mithril. Smith also showed the certificate and letter of assignment given by the Central Guild to convince Daryl and Marika. However, Daryl informed Smith that the mithril foundry was currently controlled by blacksmiths from the city of Campbell. Upon knowing that, Smith then went to the forge and managed to convince Fitbitan to let him forge mithril. Smith then showed his extraordinary ability in forging mithril. Moreover, he also had extensive knowledge about the various types of mithril that were suitable for making certain weapons. Soon after that, Smith made a sword from mithril and had Daryl to test the durability of the sword. Daryl was amazed at the strength of the mithril sword because it was very light but had strength and durability that far exceeded ordinary iron swords. Fitbitan, who finally realized that Smith was a great blacksmith, then begged Smith to teach him how to make weapons from mithril. However, Smith flatly refused the request because Fitbitan had previously been arrogant and condescending towards him. Upon hearing this rejection, Fitbitan became even more annoyed at Daryl because Smith made weapons for Daryl who was ranked lower than him. But unexpectedly, Smith then asked for the mithril sword back while saying that the sword was only a prototype and he promised that he would make a suitable weapon for Daryl, and the weapon would be able to be used with all types of aura owned by Daryl. Daryl was very happy to hear that, but he immediately became hopeless because they did not have mithril and also the tools to forge mithril, because currently the workshop was controlled by Fitbitan and his party members. Surprisingly, Smith had apparently stolen some mithril from the workshop and prepared a special furnace for forging mithril. Daryl wondered how long the furnace had been in Enveil's house because he had never seen the furnace before. Smith explained that his disciple brought the furnace while they were in the foundry. But the problem at the moment, the furnace can only be lit with magic power, while none of the humans have magic power. Therefore, Daryl then asked Reset for help to light the furnace. Reset didn't mind helping Daryl at all, even he also gave gifts and presents to Marika and the others. Smith then revealed that he agreed to become a mithril forger in Lux Village because he had heard about Daryl who managed to seize the mithril mine from the Demon Nation. Smith added that Daryl deserved a special weapon made of mithril, and he would do his best to make a special weapon that could only be used by Daryl. While Smith was doing his work, Daryl then left the workshop and encountered Fitbitan who had come to see him. Fitbitan and Daryl then got into a conversation, where Fitbitan tried to incite Daryl to go against the Central Guild and share the profits from the mithril mine with the city of Campbell, instead of leaving the mithril business to be managed by the Central Guild in the capital, which would probably take more profits from the villagers of Lux. However, Daryl immediately rejected the offer because from the beginning, he never trusted Fitbitan, who did not even hesitate to hurt his colleagues who had always helped and supported him. Upon hearing that, Fitbitan then threw his gloves and told Daryl to pick them up. The innocent Daryl immediately picked up the glove and gave it to Fitbitan, who then walked away from him. Shortly afterwards, Daryl told Enveil and the others about it, and he learned that it was a tradition for adventurers to challenge their opponents to a duel. By doing so, Fitbitan had challenged Daryl to a duel with him, and the stake was a mithril mine. Marika supported Daryl to accept the challenge because she felt confident that Daryl could defeat Fitbitan. However, Enveil did not agree with his daughter because Fitbitan was a B-ranked adventurer who had pretty good fighting skills and was also experienced on the battlefield. Enveil intended to negotiate with Fitbitan to cancel the duel, but Daryl insisted that he had accepted the challenge and would duel against Fitbitan. Upon hearing that, Smith then told Gashida and Reset to gather other materials needed to perfect Daryl's mithril weapon, while he would begin teaching Daryl how to use the mithril weapon. The next day, before the duel started, Fitbitan immediately took out his mithril weapons to make Daryl afraid. But unexpectedly, Daryl had made up his mind to fight Fitbitan in order to save the mithril mine and Lux village. Daryl then took out his mithril weapon made by Smith, but Fitbitan then underestimated Daryl because his weapon looked nothing special and ordinary. Even so, Daryl was able to launch an invisible attack that then destroyed Fitbitan's mithril shield, so Fitbitan no longer underestimated Daryl's weapon and began to fight seriously. Surprisingly, Daryl's weapon can extend and shorten, and can even transform into a whip according to the type of aura used by Daryl. With Smith's mithril weapon made just for him, Daryl was able to destroy all of Fitbitan's mithril weapons. Smith and the others seemed so proud of Daryl for winning the duel, while the exhausted Daryl was then embraced by Marika, who then invited him to go home. Soon after that, Best Fred came to see Daryl to apologize for Fitbitan's behavior in confronting Daryl and causing chaos in the village. Best Fred then told Daryl that he would punish Fitbitan and his party members for the incident. Upon hearing that, Daryl then asked Best Fred to allow him to punish Fitbitan as he also felt responsible for the incident. After getting Best Fred's approval, Daryl then ordered Fitbitan and the others to repair the houses damaged by their fight. Best Fred and Fitbitan seemed surprised because they thought that the punishment was too light. However, Daryl did not want to question it further, especially since Fitbitan had also regretted his actions. After seeing Daryl's extraordinary abilities and strength, Best Fred then offered Daryl to work in the Central Guild in the capital. At the same time, Marika, who was about to serve drinks, accidentally overheard the conversation, and suddenly felt sad. Later that evening, while Daryl was relaxing in the sauna while thinking about Best Fred's offer, Marika entered and joined him. Instead of feeling sad, Marika smilingly told Daryl that she would support Daryl to work at the guild center in the capital so that Daryl could develop his talents and abilities, and also gain many new experiences. Marika added that Daryl had done many good things for their village, so that their village became one of the prosperous villages and the residents were also happy and prosperous. Therefore, Marika will always support whatever Daryl decides to do. However, Daryl realized that Marika was actually hiding her sadness behind her smile. After all, Daryl had intended to refuse the job offer from the beginning because he did not want to leave Marika and the people who had helped him. Daryl also pointed out that he would always miss Marika's delicious dishes, so he chose to stay with Marika. Upon hearing that, Marika then cried because she felt very happy after knowing that Daryl chose to stay with her. Daryl then kissed Marika, and they spent the rest of the night together. Meanwhile, in the demon world, Bashbaza, who was visiting Granvaza, seemed surprised to see his father training even though Granvaza had not fully recovered from his injuries. Granvaza then told his son that he wanted to get into the habit of training to get his body back in shape, so that he could be prepared if the hero attacked them again. After training, Granvaza invited his son to have dinner together while talking about the current situation in the Demon Kingdom. Granvaza then asked Bashbaza about Daryl, but Bashbaza lied to his father, so Granvaza became angry and hit Bashbaza. Granvaza had found out that Bashbaza had sacked Daryl and expelled him from the demon world. Granvaza told his son that it was Daryl who had convinced the other demons to make Bashbaza one of the demon generals when most of the demons were against it because Bashbaza was considered too arrogant and still very young. Therefore, Granvaza was very angry at his son for being stupid for wasting a person who had great talent and ability like Daryl. Granvaza then told Bashbaza to apologize to Daryl and take Daryl back to the demon world. But Bashbaza firmly refused his father's order while asserting to Granvaza that he would become the greatest demon general, even without the help and support of Daryl. The following day, Marika's mother, who intends to wake Marika up, then becomes surprised when she finds Marika and Daryl sleeping together. Marika and Daryl try to hide the fact that they have slept together, but her parents seem to have found out about it and support their relationship.
助かるわ。これからもマリーカと仲良くね。
このまま黙っておくわけにはいかない。
Enveal then offered Daryl to replace him as village chief because Enveal thought that Daryl had the talent and ability to be a great leader. Daryl initially wanted to reject the offer because he thought that he, a newcomer, did not deserve to be the village chief. However, after Daryl saw Marika, who had been listening to their conversation, Daryl remembered the first time he met Marika in the forest and fell in love with her, so he then accepted the offer. Daryl then asked Enveal to allow him to marry Marika and promised to make Marika happy. Without thinking, Enveal immediately gave Daryl permission to marry his daughter, because he had also approved of their relationship from the beginning. Daryl then proposed to Marika in front of her parents, and Marika, who could not contain her happiness, immediately agreed to marry Daryl because she had loved Daryl for a long time.
本当に仲がいいかと。
幸せになろうな。
1 year later, Daryl had become village head, replacing Enveal, and managed to make the village more prosperous, with the mithril mine becoming more and more developed. Daryl had also married Marika and had a son named Gran, whose name was taken from Granvaza, the person who was very instrumental in Daryl's life in the demon world as well as Daryl's adoptive father. Soon after that, Gashida informed Daryl that the hero would be visiting their village. Upon hearing that, Daryl remembered the hero who was hailed by the human race as the greatest hero of all time. But in the judgment of Daryl and the demon soldiers, the hero was a vicious killer who did not hesitate to slaughter the demons he met. Therefore, Daryl then became panicked and anxious because he assumed that the hero's arrival in their village was to kill him, who had been a demon soldier. Daryl is actually reluctant to deal with the hero, but now that he has become the village head, he has no choice but to welcome the hero's arrival in their village. Long story short, Daryl decided to hide his identity by covering his face with a cloth while welcoming the hero's arrival with the residents. Surprisingly, the hero who came to their village turned out to be a girl named Lady, who was escorted by her 2 assistants, Sadame and Sesha. Upon seeing that, Daryl then opened his disguise because he had never met Lady, so he felt confident that Lady would not recognize him as a former dark warrior. Lady then explained to Daryl that the former hero decided to retire after being seriously injured fighting the demon generals several years ago. Lady also added that her purpose of coming to Lux village was because she wanted to have a mithril weapon made by the blacksmith in village, who was known to be very skilled and experienced in forging mithril. Although Smith had passed away some time ago, but Daryl assured Lady that they would try to make a mithril weapon suitable for Lady. Daryl then brought Lady and her party members to his house, where they were immediately welcomed by Marika, who had prepared a small welcoming party. Seeing the adorable Gran, Lady asked Daryl for permission to hold him. Surprisingly, Gran took a liking to Lady from the first time she held him, and they soon became close. The following day, Daryl took Lady and her assistants to the mithril foundry to see the process of forging mithril into weapons while introducing them to Sakai, Smith's disciple who was currently in charge of the workshop. Shortly afterward, Lady told Daryl that she intended to recruit adventurers from Lux village to join her party members in an effort to defeat the Demon King and his army. Gashita, who heard that, suddenly became excited and told Lady that he wanted to join her party. However, Enveal decided to hold a duel between the adventurers from Lux village against Lady and her assistants so that Lady could assess the strengths and abilities possessed by the adventurers before officially recruiting them. But unexpectedly, Lady and her assistants could easily defeat the adventurers. On the other hand, Gashita secretly launched an attack using arrows, but Lady managed to discover his whereabouts and tried to launch a counterattack. At the same time, Daryl threw a tomato at Lady, just before Lady launched a counterattack at Gashita, who thought that he had failed and did not have enough ability to join Lady's party. However, Daryl then encouraged Gashita by saying that Gashita was currently at rank B and was the strongest adventurer in Lux village. Even so, Lady challenged Daryl to a fight because she realized that Daryl was the strongest person in the village. Daryl initially refused to fight, but Lady had attacked him first, so Daryl had no choice but to fight against Lady. Since Daryl could easily break all of her attacks with his mithril weapon, Lady then began to fight seriously, and used her ultimate technique, which was the main technique taught by the former hero. Daryl, who had known the technique when he saw the battle of the demon warriors against the hero, then tried to imitate the technique and managed to defeat Lady. On the other hand, Lady looked so amazed because she did not expect that Daryl could use the ultimate technique that was only passed down to heroes. After learning that Daryl had extraordinary strength, Lady then tried to recruit Daryl into her party, but Daryl immediately refused the offer. Arriving home, while babysitting Gran, Daryl remembered Deroye, who once told him that she was willing to fight against anyone in order to protect the demon nation. Therefore, Daryl refused to join the hero because he did not want to point a gun at the demons who had treated him well. Daryl also didn't want to leave his beloved family and also the villagers of Lux, because Daryl was currently the village chief who was responsible for protecting them. The next day, Lady and her female assistant, Sadame, secretly followed Daryl, who was doing his routine as the village chief, and realized that Daryl was a good person and really cared about the people in the village, so they were very grateful to Daryl. Sadame then tries to convince Lady that Daryl has an equally important duty as the hero because Daryl has the responsibility to protect the people in the village. At night, Lady then asks Daryl about Daryl being able to use the ultimate technique, even though the technique is only known by heroes. Daryl actually wanted to reveal that the technique was very easy to imitate, but he chose to not answer the question, so that Lady would not be suspicious of him. Lady then drew her sword at Daryl, saying that with such abilities and strength, Daryl should help them fight the Demon King's army. But unexpectedly, Daryl instead said that they should stop the battle because the demons were actually only fighting to defend themselves from the hero who attacked them first. Upon hearing that, Lady then told the story of the former hero, Alanzir, who used to live happily with his wife and his infant son. But that happiness vanished instantly when his wife was killed by one of the demon generals named Bayzetan. A furious Alanzir finally managed to avenge his wife's death by killing Bayzetan, but he could not find the whereabouts of his infant son. Alanzir, who was angry because he could not find his beloved son, then fought the demons so that no one else would suffer the same fate as him. Therefore, Lady begged Daryl to help her fight the demons to protect humanity. However, Daryl still refused and firmly said that the demons also had families and they fought to protect the families they cared about. Daryl also hoped that one day the demon nation and the human nation could reconcile and coexist peacefully, because they would only harm each other if they continued the war. Upon learning that, Lady changed her mind and no longer insisted on recruiting Daryl as part of her party members. Unexpectedly, Lady instead asks Daryl to train her so that she can become a formidable hero who not only has great strength, but also has a kind heart like Daryl. Daryl initially wanted to refuse Lady's request, but after considering that he might be able to convince Lady to stop the war, Daryl finally agreed to train Lady. A few days later, Reset stopped by Daryl's house after he had a meeting with Best Fred at the guild center in the capital to discuss the continuation of the mithril business cooperation. However, unbeknownst to Reset, Zabiantis was secretly following him and she finally found out the location of Daryl's whereabouts, who had been sought after by Deroye and several other demons. When Reset told Daryl that he had received a higher position thanks to their collaboration, Zabiantis suddenly appeared and scolded Reset for hiding Daryl's whereabouts from them. Zabiantis then revealed that she had deliberately followed Reset because Reset had kept the supply of mithril from the other demons a secret, and when she finally learned about Reset's cooperation with the human race, Zabiantis then ordered Daryl to hand over the mithril mine to the demons. Because Daryl refused, Zabiantis intended to beat Daryl, but she then abandoned her intention because she felt afraid when faced with Marika, who stood up to defend Daryl. Daryl then took Zabiantis and Reset to the forest, but Zabiantis instead challenged Daryl to a fight while threatening to destroy the village. Upon hearing that, Daryl had no choice but to fight against Zabiantis to protect his village. Surprisingly, Daryl could easily defeat Zabiantis, so Zabiantis asked for a rematch several times, although in the end Daryl always won. An enraged Zabiantis then unleashed her ultimate technique that could devastate the village with one strike. But Daryl managed to break the attack with the hero's ultimate technique, and made Zabiantis bounce into the air. Daryl rushed to save Zabiantis before she fell from the height, but he fell too, so Reset immediately used his water magic to save them. Due to the embarrassing incident, Daryl finally agreed to sell the mithril to Zabiantis at a cheaper price, while Zabiantis promised to keep the embarrassing incident a secret from Marika as long as Daryl made a mithril weapon for her. Later that night, Zabiantis, who was relaxing in the sauna, accidentally met Lady, who was also there. Daryl, on the other hand, panicked as he worried about the impending feud between the hero and the demon general. Daryl then invited Zabiantis and Lady to have dinner together while revealing to them that he was a human raised by demons in the demon world. Upon learning that, Lady finally understood Daryl's reason for refusing to join her party to fight the Demon King. Even so, Lady then questioned Zabiantis' presence in the human world and told her to go home because she had no business here. Upon seeing that Zabiantis and Lady were about to start a feud, Daryl tried to break them up, but Marika then interrupted and suggested that they settle the matter with a duel. Since Zabiantis and Lady immediately agreed to the proposal, Daryl then determined the location of the duel and also the rules that prohibited them from killing each other. The next day, Zabiantis and Lady immediately mobilized all their strength and fought fiercely, trying to defeat each other. Due to their overwhelming power, the effects of their attacks became difficult to contain, so Sadame had to create a stronger shield to withstand the effects of the attacks so as not to affect the environment around the battle site. Surprisingly, Daryl also helped create the same shield as Sadame, so Sadame was surprised that Daryl was able to do this. Daryl revealed that he was just copying Sadame's technique to create a shield, which he thought was quite easy to do. Soon after that, Marika arrived with Gran while bringing lunch for them. Seeing Lady and Zabiantis fighting, Gran suddenly became excited and jumped towards them. At the same time, the hill above them suddenly collapsed due to the effects of the tremendous battle, and a landslide almost fell on Gran. Upon seeing that, Daryl immediately grabbed Gran to protect him, as well as Lady and Zabiantis, who swiftly destroyed the rocks to protect Gran. Seeing Zabiantis, who rushed to protect Gran when the baby boy was in danger, Lady then became impressed because a demon like Zabiantis still had the kindness and conscience to protect humans. After the incident, thanks to Gran, Lady and Zabiantis decided to stop fighting and reconcile with each other. Sometime later, the former hero, Alanzir, suddenly came to visit Lux's village. Daryl suddenly became panicked because Zabiantis was still in his house, so he immediately told Zabiantis about Alanzir, who used to be the hero. Upon knowing that, Zabiantis then became shocked because she didn't expect that Alanzir was still alive after being severely injured during the fight against Granvaza. Daryl, who had assumed that Alanzir was a dangerous cold-blooded killer, was even more surprised to learn that Alanzir loved children and was very friendly to humans. Therefore, Daryl forbade Zabiantis to use her magical power when Alanzir was in their village to hide her identity as a demon. Alanzir then told Daryl that his purpose for coming to the village was to return to train Lady because his wounds had fully healed. Upon hearing that, Daryl and Gashida immediately took Alanzir to the training hall, where Alanzir would train Lady while giving his autographs to his fans who had been waiting for his arrival in the village. In a sparring match, Alanzir was able to easily parry Lady's attacks and counterattack her while continuing to give autographs to his fans, as if he was just playing with Lady. Even so, Alanzir praised Lady because her sword skills had improved significantly. Lady then revealed to Alanzir that she had been training with Daryl and told Alanzir that Daryl had powers that might almost match Alanzir, the legendary hero. Upon learning that, Alanzir then challenged Daryl to a fight, ignoring Daryl, who tried to reject the challenge by saying that he had retired as an adventurer. Even though it was just a sparring match, Alanzir did not seem to hesitate to exert all his strength against Daryl, until he gave off a very scary aura. Daryl, who realized this, then tried to buy time by inviting Alanzir to have lunch together, which he agrees to. Daryl and Alanzir then enjoy Marika's lunch, and Alanzir seems to be moved with happiness because of Marika's delicious cooking, so he misses the times when his late wife cooked delicious dishes for him. Zabiantis, on the other hand, was seen watching Alanzir from a distance, and assumed that the hero was not as dangerous and frightening as the rumors circulating in the demon world. However, Zabiantis accidentally used her magic power to pick up a cloth that was about to fall, so Alanzir immediately detected the magic power and rushed to shoot his spear at Zabiantis. Alanzir intended to kill Zabiantis on the spot, but Daryl arrived in time to stop him. Daryl tried to warn Alanzir to let Zabiantis live, but Alanzir ignored the warning while displaying such extraordinary aura power that Daryl seemed to see an evil demon inside Alanzir. Daryl tried to restrain the movement of Alanzir, who intended to attack Zabiantis, but unfortunately, Daryl was blown away by Alanzir's powerful aura. Even so, Daryl did not give up and managed to save Zabiantis while holding back Alanzir's attack with an Endure-type aura. Although Alanzir only used pieces of wood as weapons, he managed to corner Daryl and Zabiantis. Alanzir seemed impressed to learn that Daryl had all types of aura, just like him, and tried to recruit Daryl to join the hero's party to fight the demons. Alanzir, who thought that Daryl was siding with the demons, then used his ultimate technique as a counterattack, but surprisingly, Daryl was able to use a similar technique, although Alanzir eventually managed to knock Daryl down and leave him seriously injured. Daryl then explained that he was only trying to protect his beloved family and people who were precious to him, including the Zabiantis, so he tried as much as possible to avoid war. Upon hearing that, Alanzir then asked Daryl why he cared so much about the demons who were the enemies of humans. Daryl finally revealed to Alanzir that he was adopted by Granvaza after the Devil Nation's war against the human race. At that time, Daryl, who was still a baby, was the will of one of the demon generals named Bazetan, who entrusted him to Granvaza before he died. Alanzir, who seemed surprised to hear the story, then asked about Daryl's age. When Daryl said he was 33 years old, Alanzir remembered the tragedy he experienced a few years ago, and Alanzir believed that Daryl was his lost son. Moreover, Daryl also has all 4 types of aura, which is a hereditary legacy of heroes. Alanzir then hugged Daryl while revealing that Daryl was his lost son, who was apparently kidnapped by Bazetan. In the meantime, Granvaza is facing the Demon King while pleading with the Demon King to immediately sack Bashbaza, because Bashbaza has made this situation chaotic, so that the demons have lost confidence in the officials in the Demon Kingdom. However, the Demon King, who was in his true form, seemed to know that the real reason Granvaza wanted to sack Bashbaza was because Bashbaza expelled Daryl from the demon world. Therefore, the Demon King then asked Granvaza to determine which of them was his most precious son. Upon hearing that, Granvaza suggested that Bashbaza and Daryl were his 2 most precious sons, so the Demon King then told Granvaza the location of Daryl's whereabouts. Meanwhile, Daryl, who did not expect that he was the son of Alanzir, then asked Alanzir why Alanzir was so sure that he was his son. Alanzir then revealed to Daryl that the demon who had killed his wife was Bazetan, and after the murder, Bazetan kidnapped his infant son. At the same time, Alanzir detected the presence of a demon that suddenly appeared from behind them, so he then launched an attack and prepared to face the demon. Surprisingly, the demon that came was Granvaza, who could easily parry the attack, and was also preparing to start a fight against the hero. Upon seeing that, Daryl then tried to stop them while revealing to Alanzir that Granvaza was his adoptive father who had cared for and raised him in the demon world. Granvaza then told Daryl that he had failed to be a good father to Daryl because all this time, he did not know that Daryl was a human. Even so, Daryl loves Granvaza very much and considers Granvaza to be the most precious person in his life because Granvaza has cared for and raised him like his biological son and taught him many things. Therefore, Daryl told Granvaza that he would never be able to repay Granvaza's kindness. Upon hearing that, Granvaza suddenly hugged Daryl and said that Daryl was his encouragement, who had given him a reason to become stronger, so that he could protect Daryl. On the other hand, Alanzir then became angry and jealous to see Daryl, who was so fond of Granvaza, who he considered as his biological father, even though for years, Alanzir felt very lost because he could not find the whereabouts of his beloved son who was kidnapped by the demon general. Upon learning that, Granvaza told Alanzir that he was ready to bear the guilt of Bazetan, who had taken away Alanzir's happiness, and asked Alanzir to vent all hatred towards him while telling Daryl to live happily with his biological father. This time, Daryl was unable to stop Alanzir and Granvaza from starting their fight, until Marika suddenly appeared with Gran, then doused them while telling them not to fight each other in front of their grandson. Daryl was both relieved and proud of Marika and Gran for preventing the feud between the hero and the demon general. Daryl then told Granvaza to stay alive if he wanted to see Daryl live happily with his family. After that, Daryl turns to Alanzir and tells the hero that he really hopes Alanzir can always accompany Gran and spend time with Gran as a grandfather to make up for the time he has missed as a father. Daryl then thanked Marika and told her that he felt lucky and grateful to have married Marika. Upon hearing that, Marika was happy and hugged Daryl tightly. In the demon world, Bashbaza, who had been preparing for a party, was surprised by the news that he had been fired as one of the demon generals, so that all invited guests refused to attend the party. Not only that, Bashbaza was also asked to pay off all his debts that had been in arrears for years. Bashbaza then became increasingly angry because the people around him alluded to him being incapable of doing anything without Daryl's help, so Bashbaza became even more hateful towards Daryl. Upon arriving home, Marika immediately treated Daryl, who was injured quite badly due to his fight against Alanzir, while Gran was seen playing with his grandfathers. However, because Alanzir and Granvaza were involved in a heated argument because Alanzir did not approve of Gran's name taken from Granvaza, Gran then cried, so Marika immediately held her baby boy to calm him down. Soon after that, Daryl gets a call from Reset and Gran immediately asks for the phone because he wants to talk to Reset. Although Gran spoke in baby language, Reset seemed to understand his words, so Reset then scolded Gran's grandfathers over the phone, not knowing that Gran's grandfathers were the hero and also the demon general. Shortly afterwards, Daryl threw a party to celebrate the good things that happened in his life, as Daryl finally met his biological father after a long time, and Alanzir decided to reconcile with Granvaza. The next day, Lady asked Alanzir to train her because she still wanted to carry out her mission to defeat the Demon King. Daryl then asked Lady if she would still continue the mission, even though Lady had witnessed with her own eyes that the demons also had a conscience, even some of them had shown genuine care and affection for humans. The curious Daryl then asked the heroes about the Demon King. Alanzir explains that the Demon King has been considered the source of disaster and destruction in the human world. Therefore, the heroes believe that they can create world peace by defeating the Demon King, so they continue to fight. However, Alanzir did not deny that it was all a front because they were fighting the Demon King for selfish purposes. Alanzir explained that the Demon King had extraordinary magic power and knowledge, so humans flocked to try to seize that power in order to become a race superior to the Demon Nation. At least that's what Alanzir knew from the guild center. Alanzir then asked Granvaza the truth about the Demon King, who confirmed that the Demon King did have extraordinary magic power and bestowed the magic power to the demons. Granvaza also added that the Demon King is an immortal being and that immortality is proven because the Demon King has never abdicated and has never aged since the creation of the Demon Nation until now. Upon learning that, Alanzir then gave Lady the freedom to determine her own path while telling her that their war started because of human greed. Lady argued that she would keep fighting because wars will always happen. Even so, Lady said that she would determine her own path after seeing everything with her own eyes. Soon after that, Vidbitan and his party members appeared and informed them about a dragon attacking the mithril mine. Upon hearing that, Daryl immediately told Gashida to prepare the adventurers to evacuate the mine workers, while he and the others rushed to the mithril mine with the help of Zabiantis. Upon arrival, the miners informed Daryl that the knockers were still trapped in the mine, so Daryl and Alanzir rushed into the mine to rescue them, while Granvaza tried to fight the fire dragon, Salamander, who continued to spout flames with the help of Zabiantis and Lady. Lady and her party members seemed overwhelmed by Salamander as their attacks were unable to hurt the dragon. On the other hand, Granvaza managed to control Salamander's fire with his power, but the attack was also not enough to bring down the dragon. Salamander then turned to Daryl and Alanzir, who tried to save the knockers who were crushed by the mine rubble. Upon knowing that they could not save the knockers if the dragon was still near them, Daryl and Alanzir then teamed up against Salamander and managed to drive the dragon away. Shortly afterwards, Granvaza decided to return to the demon world because he wanted to investigate the truth behind the attack incident, while Daryl and the others treated the injured people with the help of Lady and her party members. Upon arriving in the demon world, Granvaza confronted Bashbaza, who turned out to be the mastermind behind the attack incident. Bashbaza revealed to his father that he had entered the Demon King's vault to obtain the forbidden hex magic and control Salamander with the forbidden magic. Upon learning that, Granvaza was disappointed in his son because Bashbaza was desperate to use the forbidden magic, even though Bashbaza should have avoided the forbidden magic because the risk was too high. Granvaza then compared Bashbaza to Daryl, which then made Bashbaza even more angry because his father cared and loved Daryl more than his biological son. Bashbaza, who had united his consciousness with Salamander, could even see through Salamander's eyes that his father had made peace with the human race, when the demon nation should have destroyed the human race. However, Granvaza did not heed Bashbaza's words at all and instead told Bashbaza to stop everything because forbidden magic could make Bashbaza lose his mind, even destroy his own body. The disappointed Granvaza then tried to attack Bashbaza to stop him, but Bashbaza was able to easily parry the attack, then summoned Salamander while telling Granvaza that he would kill Daryl and also the hero. Meanwhile, Daryl, who was walking through the mine to look for the miners who were still trapped in the mine, was surprised by the appearance of Gigantomachia, the magical earth beast who told Daryl that Salamander harbored hatred for Daryl, which explained that whoever was controlling Salamander was the one who really hated Daryl. Upon seeing that Daryl had a good heart, Gigantomachia then improved Daryl's blade since the mithril was mined from his body. Before disappearing, Gigantomachia told Daryl to prepare himself because the village would become a battlefield. Soon after that, Daryl got a phone call from Granvaza, who informed him that Bashbaza was the one who had controlled Salamander, and was now heading to Lux village to kill Daryl. Daryl, who had expected it, then rushed back to the village and asked Enviel to evacuate the villagers, while he would fight against Bashbaza. Before Daryl headed to the battlefield, Marika gave armored gloves and her wedding ring to keep him safe. Long story short, Bashbaza finally arrived at Lux village riding a salamander, and immediately greeted Daryl in a friendly manner. Daryl tried to talk to Bashbaza to avoid the war as much as possible, but Bashbaza ignored Daryl's words and instead congratulated Daryl because Daryl was married. Bashbaza then added that he would kill Daryl's wife as well as the villagers before he killed Daryl, because he wanted Daryl to feel the terrible pain that he had experienced over the years when Daryl took all the attention and affection from his father. Daryl, who could not let Bashbaza hurt his family, then used his weapon to bring down Salamander with the help of Zabiantus. Daryl then asked Zabiantus and the others to fight Salamander, while he would fight Bashbaza elsewhere. Before starting the fight, Daryl asked why Bashbaza hated him so much. Daryl thought that Bashbaza was angry with him because of the mithril mine and was willing to negotiate in favor of the demon nation. Surprisingly, Bashbaza told Daryl that he intended to create peace by killing Daryl and all humanity, so that he would be recognized by the Demon King as the strongest demon general in the demon world. Daryl and Bashbaza then engaged in a fierce battle until Bashbaza finally managed to knock out Daryl, who had no idea that Bashbaza had become stronger. Bashbaza revealed that for the past year he had studied forbidden magic and traveled to increase his magic power until he was able to subdue Salamander. Upon learning that, Daryl sincerely congratulated Bashbaza for his hard work that had paid off. Daryl had always known that Bashbaza was actually very talented and also always worked hard to achieve his goals, so he was happy that Bashbaza had become stronger. But unexpectedly, Bashbaza took Daryl's sincere words as nonsense and attacked him. Fortunately, Daryl managed to parry the attack, then counterattacked with the hero's ultimate technique and managed to knock Bashbaza down. An angry Bashbaza then used his ultimate technique to attack Daryl when it should have been used to kill the hero. On the other hand, Alanzir and Granvaza worked together to stop Salamander with their respective powers, assisted by Gashida and others who tried to stop Salamander's movements. They succeeded in defeating the Salamander, but instead awakened the part of the Salamander inside Bashbaza, so that Bashbaza experienced a significant increase in strength and transformed into the human-dragon hybrid. Seeing Bashbaza, who created a giant fireball to destroy the village, Daryl then mobilized all his strength to destroy the giant fireball before it hit the village. With the power of aura that is even greater than Alanzir, Daryl was able to break the deadly attack, although he failed to bring down Bashbaza, who was still able to survive. A furious Bashbaza then begins to turn into a dragon as the hex further joins him to Salamander. The hex begins to affect Daryl, synchronizing their minds and dragging him into Bashbaza's memories. Ever since Granvaza brought Daryl home, Bashbaza has felt like Daryl replaced him as Granvaza's son. Even when it looked like he could work beside his father, Granvaza retired and assigned Daryl as his aide instead. Daryl is deeply affected by Bashbaza's loneliness, which only makes Bashbaza angrier. Therefore, Daryl draws Bashbaza into his own memories, showing him about his own loneliness over never fitting in as a demon and treasuring Bashbaza as his younger brother. Upon knowing that, Bashbaza realizes that his own stubbornness caused his pain and weeps, and he manages to break the hex. However, Salamander, free of the hex, prepares to rampage. Upon knowing that, Bashbaza fuses with Salamander's body to fly him far away at the cost of his life, but Granvaza and Daryl work together to save him. Granvaza then hugged Bashbaza and apologized to his son because all this time, he did not realize that his care and affection for Daryl had actually hurt Bashbaza. Returning home victorious, Daryl was immediately greeted by Marika, who hugged him so excited that it crushed his spine. Soon after that, the demon lord exiles Bashverza for eternity, so he visits Daryl and meets his nephew, Gran. Bashbaza then apologized to Daryl for all his mistakes that were impossible to fix, and Granvaza also apologized to Daryl. However, Daryl chose not to make an issue of it because Granvaza and Bashbaza are his family. Upon meeting Bashbaza, Gran speaks his first words, "Big brother Bashverza," which reminds Bashbaza of when he first met Daryl. Holding Gran in his arms, Bashbaza tells Daryl that he will atone for his sins by protecting those who are precious to Daryl. Shortly afterwards, Daryl commissions a family portrait, humans, demons, and heroes together. The anime ends with Bashverza, who leaves the village to travel the world, but he promises to visit Daryl occasionally, and Daryl's life in the village returns to peaceful normality. The moral lesson that we can learn from this anime is, as Oscar Wilde mentioned in one of his books, every saint has a past, and every sinner has a future. Therefore, never hesitate to be kind to others, because sooner or later that kindness will come back to us.